My name is Barbara Rodriguez, and I am 62 years old. What I am about to share is not just the story of a betrayal, it is the kind of nightmare that changes how you look at your own family forever. Only 3 days ago, my husband Gerald and I were taken on what our youngest son called a special anniversary hike. He told us it was to celebrate 40 years of marriage. In reality, it was an execution. Our execution. The morning had seemed ordinary enough. The air was crisp, and the sky was a clear, endless blue. Carl, our youngest son, and his wife Lisa greeted us at the door with smiles that looked too perfect, too rehearsed. Lisa hugged me, whispering, "This will be a day to remember, Mom." I shivered without knowing why. The drive felt like a performance. Lisa hummed along to the radio, pointing out the scenery as if we were tourists. Carl kept his hands steady on the wheel, his eyes occasionally flicking to the rearview mirror where Gerald and I sat in the back seat. Each time his gaze met mine, I saw something hollow, something cold that I could not name but my body recognized as danger. After 2 hours, we arrived at the trailhead. The place was beautiful, tall trees swaying gently, the faint rush of water somewhere in the distance, and birds darting in and out of the branches. But instead of peace, all I felt was dread. Gerald squeezed my hand once, a silent reminder of the plan we had made the night before. Keep calm, play along, and make sure the small device hidden in his jacket pocket was recording. The first part of the hike was easy enough. Lisa walked ahead, snapping photographs of every wildflower she spotted. "This will be a memory book for our children," she said cheerfully. Her voice was so light, so affectionate, that any stranger would have believed her to be the most devoted daughter-in-law in the world. I knew better. Carl stayed behind us, his footsteps deliberate, his presence heavy. Every time I slowed down to catch my breath, he was there, his hand hovering close to my back as though ready to steady me. But in his eyes, there was no concern, only calculation. We had been walking for less than an hour when Lisa suddenly called out, "Look at that! The view from that cliff will be incredible for pictures." She pointed to a narrow side path leading to a rocky ledge that rose nearly 100 feet above the valley floor. Even from where I stood, I could see how loose the stones were, how treacherous the slope looked. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said carefully. "It looks dangerous for people our age." Carl laughed lightly. "Come on, Mom. It's just a short climb. Besides, this is supposed to be special. You don't want to disappoint Lisa, do you?" Gerald's grip on my hand tightened. His knuckles were white, but his face stayed calm. Together, we followed them up the rocky path, each step heavier than the last. The higher we climbed, the clearer it became. This was the place they had chosen. The cliff was too perfect, too isolated. At the top, the view opened wide. Rolling hills stretched out toward the horizon, and the river cut a silver line through the forest below. On any other day, it would have been breathtaking. On this day, it was a stage for murder. "Stand over here," Lisa instructed, pointing to a spot dangerously close to the edge. "I want the valley in the background." She lifted her camera and smiled. But her eyes were sharp, gleaming with something cruel. Gerald and I stood shoulder to shoulder, forcing smiles. I felt Carl move behind us, his boots crunching on the gravel. His shadow fell over mine. "Perfect," Lisa said. "Now, take one step back." My heart stopped. That step would place us on the very rim of the cliff. I looked at Gerald, and in his eyes I saw the same thought. This was it. Then it happened. A sudden, brutal shove. The ground vanished beneath our feet. The world tilted, and the sky spun. I heard Lisa's triumphant command, sharp and chilling. "Smile. This will be your last photo." We fell. Air tore at my face, my arms flailed, and for one endless moment I thought of my eldest son Gabriel, who had died on a night just like this more than 25 years ago. Now I knew his death had not been an accident. The impact came with a sickening crack. Pain shot through my body like fire, stealing my breath. Blood filled my mouth with its metallic taste. For a heartbeat I thought it was the end. Then I heard Gerald's voice, broken but steady. "Barbara, don't move, play dead." And so I did. Long before that terrible day on the cliff, I believed my life had been blessed. For more than 4 decades, Gerald and I built what we thought was the perfect American family. We lived in a modest but warm house, where every corner told a story. The kitchen smelled of fresh bread on Sunday mornings. The porch was our favorite place to sit at dusk, watching the sky blush red as the sun went down. Gerald worked with his hands in his small wood shop, creating tables, chairs, and cabinets that neighbors admired. I spent my years teaching English at the local high school, bringing home tales of spirited teenagers who reminded me of the future. Our pride, however, was always in our two sons, Gabriel, our firstborn, and Carl, our youngest. Gabriel was the light in the house. With a wide smile and an even wider heart, he seemed destined for something great. At 21, he was studying finance and spoke often about wanting to help us plan for retirement. He carried himself with a natural confidence that made everyone, from neighbors to professors, take him seriously. Carl, 5 years younger, was quieter. He rarely volunteered stories about his life, but I assumed that was just his nature. He helped Gerald in the shop sometimes, though not with the same passion as his brother. He had his strengths. He was clever with numbers, quick with solutions when something broke, but he also carried a streak of bitterness that I often dismissed as youthful insecurity. Still, I told myself I loved them equally. A mother does not play favorites, at least not consciously. Sundays were sacred in our household. After church, we would gather around the oak dining table that Gerald had carved himself. It was large and sturdy, meant to hold generations of meals and memories. Gabriel always had a story to tell, plans to intern at a bank, ideas for a business, or jokes that made his father chuckle. Carl would sit beside him, quietly pushing food around his plate. Sometimes I would ask if he was all right, and he would shrug, muttering that he was fine. My sisters, Margaret and Sandra, often joined us for these gatherings with their husbands and children. The house would be full of laughter and the chaotic joy of cousins running through hallways. The women shared recipes in the kitchen, while the men found something to repair outside, turning chores into conversation. Looking back, I realized those Sundays were like the glossy photographs families place in albums, perfect on the surface, concealing the cracks beneath. Gabriel once told me he dreamed of helping us travel after retirement. "Mom, Dad, you've spent your lives working. When I finish school and get settled, I'll make sure you see the ocean, the mountains, maybe even Europe." His words lit me up inside. Gerald and I often spoke of those trips on our evening walks. We believed we would grow old together, surrounded by children and grandchildren, living out the American dream. But even then, shadows lingered. I remember one autumn evening when Gabriel and Carl argued in the hallway. Their voices were sharp, their words clipped. I stepped out of the kitchen, but as soon as they saw me, the argument stopped. Gabriel's face flushed with anger, Carl's with something colder, resentment. When I asked what it was about, Gerald, ever the peacemaker, said it was just brotherly nonsense. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe the illusion of harmony. Looking back, that was the first sign of the storm to come. Another memory stands out. On Gabriel's 21st birthday, we hosted a large dinner. Friends, family, laughter filled the house. Gabriel blew out the candles with a wish he would not share. Later, as I cleaned dishes in the kitchen, I overheard Carl whisper something harsh to him on the porch. I could not make out every word, but I heard the bitterness in Carl's tone, the sting of envy. When they came back inside, Gabriel's smile had dimmed. Still, I brushed it off. What mother wants to believe her children might truly despise one another? Years later, I understand what I could not see then. Envy is a seed that grows silently, feeding on every perceived slight, every comparison, until it strangles whatever love might have been there. Back then, however, I still thought I had a perfect family. Gerald brought me wildflowers from the roadside, slipping them into a jar on the table with a grin. Gabriel studied late but always found time to call me Mom in that warm, reassuring voice. Carl, though distant, still kissed me on the cheek goodnight when he came home. I clung to these moments, convinced they proved everything was fine. What I did not know was that the very illusion of peace, the carefully crafted picture of a loving family, was the camouflage that allowed betrayal to take root. The truth, as I would later discover, had been buried for 25 years, waiting for the day it would resurface in the most violent way imaginable. There are nights you never forget, nights that mark a before and after in your life. For me, that night arrived 25 years ago, when our oldest son Gabriel did not come home. It had started like any ordinary October evening. Dinner was ready by 7. I set the table with my mother's china, the one I reserved for family nights. Gerald washed up in the bathroom while I called up the stairs, expecting both boys to come down. Carl appeared, carrying his textbooks, muttering about homework. Gabriel's chair, however, stayed empty. "Maybe he's with friends," Gerald said as he took his seat. But as the hours passed, worry gnawed at me. By 11, I was pacing. By midnight, I was standing at the window, scanning the street for headlights. By 1, I was calling neighbors to ask if they had seen him. Carl remained in his room, supposedly studying. When I checked on him, he avoided my eyes. There was a tightness in his expression I could not read at the time, but that now haunts me. Finally, Gerald grabbed his coat. "I'll go look," he said. Several neighbors joined him carrying flashlights. I stayed behind, praying in the living room, clutching Gabriel's jacket against my chest. At dawn, the phone rang. The sheriff's voice was heavy. They had found Gabriel's body at the bottom of a gorge outside town. He had fallen from the edge of the trail. They believed it was an accident. Perhaps he slipped in the dark. I collapsed. The world spun, the floor rose up, and my scream tore through the house like glass shattering. I remember Carl standing in the hallway, his face pale, his hands clenched. No tears, no wail, only silence. The days that followed blurred together. I wore my black dress, the same one from my mother's funeral. Friends brought casseroles, neighbors offered prayers, but nothing could fill the void. At the funeral, I leaned on Gerald, my body so weak it felt like bone and grief were all that kept me upright. Carl stood near the casket, his expression unreadable. While I wept until my throat burned, he remained calm, too calm. At the time, I told myself everyone grieves differently. Now, when I remember his steady gaze, I see something else entirely: calculation, not sorrow. Life after Gabriel's death was like living in a house with broken windows. No matter how you patch the cracks, the cold still gets in. Gerald tried to keep me steady, reminding me that Carl still needed us. Slowly, I forced myself to function again. I returned to teaching, though my heart was never in it the same way. Gerald buried himself in his workshop, hammering wood with a fury that frightened me. And Carl changed. Almost overnight, he became more attentive, more helpful. He volunteered to fix things around the house, to run errands, to carry groceries for me. He lingered near Gerald's shop, offering to hold wood or hand over tools. I told myself he was maturing, that the tragedy had woken something gentle in him. But I was blind. He was not comforting us. He was rehearsing his disguise. One night, perhaps a month after the funeral, I found Carl in the kitchen, sitting at the table where Gabriel once did his homework. He was staring at nothing, a strange look in his eyes. "Are you all right?" I asked softly. He blinked, forced a smile, and said, "Yes, Mom. I just miss him." I hugged him, relief flooding me. At least, I thought grief had finally broken through his shell. But years later, those words would echo in my mind with a cruel twist. Did he really miss his brother, or was he missing the control Gabriel had always threatened to hold over him? I often think of Gerald during those months. He never spoke much about Gabriel's death. At night, I would find him staring out the window, his jaw tight, his eyes distant. When I asked what was wrong, he only said, "I'm fine." I mistook his silence for stoicism, never imagining it was the weight of a terrible secret he had buried that night at the gorge. Back then, I convinced myself we had to move forward. I clung to Carl's sudden attentiveness, believing he was the blessing that would help us heal. Every smile, every chore, every small gesture of kindness felt like proof that we still had a future. I told myself we were a family again. I told myself the worst was behind us. I was wrong. Because the truth, the one Gerald would not reveal for a quarter of a century, was far darker than I could have imagined. Gabriel had not stumbled. He had not slipped. He had been pushed. Years passed after Gabriel's death. Gerald and I grew older, though we still carried our grief like an invisible scar. We tried to live quietly, saving every dollar, believing our sacrifices would secure the future for our family and grandchildren. By the time we reached our 60s, we had built a nest egg of nearly $2.5 million. The house was paid off, the land inherited from my parents had appreciated in value, and Gerald's careful investments had grown steadily. To us, the money was not about luxury, it was about peace of mind, the promise that our son's children would always have stability. That was when Carl began to circle us more closely. One evening he arrived with Lisa, both of them dressed neatly, almost formally, as if for a business meeting rather than a family dinner. After dessert, Carl cleared his throat and spoke with a tone that was half gentle, half commanding. "Mom, Dad, you're both in your 60s now. It's time to put your affairs in order. You never know what might happen. Gerald looked at me, uneasy, but Carl pressed on. It would be smart to update the will, maybe even set up a trust. Lisa and I can handle the details. Lisa reached across the table and touched my hand, her smile sweet but her grip firm. We only want to protect you. Think of it as love, not business. Her words unsettled me. Still, Gerald, ever trusting, nodded. Perhaps they're right, Barbara. It's practical. A week later, we met with Harold Gagnon, the lawyer who had handled our family's documents for decades. He explained the options: dividing assets among grandchildren, creating a trust, or keeping a traditional will. But Carl steered the conversation relentlessly toward one choice, naming him and Lisa as sole heirs. It's the simplest way, he insisted. We'll make sure everything is distributed fairly. Besides, you'll need us when you're older. Who else will handle things if you get sick? I felt my stomach twist. What about Gabriel's children? I asked quietly, even though the wound of his death still bled. Carl's expression hardened for a second before softening again. Of course we'll care for them. But you need one point of control, not a complicated structure. Trust me. Lisa squeezed my arm. We're a united family. Forever. Her words echoed like a chill through my bones. Gerald signed the papers without much resistance. I hesitated, my pen hovering. I thought of Gabriel, his plans to take care of us, his laughter around the table, his promise that we would see the world together. My heart screamed, no. But Gerald's trusting eyes pleaded with me, and against my instincts, I signed. The ceremony ended with hugs and smiles. Lisa leaned close and whispered, "Now you'll never have to worry again." Her perfume was sweet, but the words felt poisoned. That night, as I cooked dinner, unease gnawed at me. Every memory in the house, birthdays, holidays, Gabriel's empty chair seemed to watch me, whispering that I had made a terrible mistake. Carl and Lisa began visiting more often after that, but their tone changed. They no longer came simply to share meals or see us. Instead, every conversation circled back to money. "Mom, this house is too big for you and Dad," Lisa said, examining the furniture Gerald had crafted with eyes that seemed to measure value rather than beauty. "You should sell while the market is high. We can help you find a comfortable condo." Carl added, "It's logical. Maintenance is costly. Think about the stairs. What if one of you falls?" Gerald, practical as always, considered their arguments. "Maybe they have a point," he murmured. But I could not shake the chill. I loved our house. Every room carried 40 years of life. To sell it felt like burying my own soul. When I resisted, Carl's voice sharpened. "Mom, you're being irrational. Don't you trust us?" I smiled weakly, pretending, but inside I heard the crack of something breaking. It was the sound of love turning into leverage. The weeks that followed the signing of the will were unlike anything I had known. For decades, Carl had been the quieter son, the one who lingered in the shadows. Now he stood in the center of our lives, pressing into every decision with a confidence that frightened me. He and Lisa appeared at the house almost every other day. They came not with laughter or small gifts for their children, but with plans, financial plans, relocation ideas, insurance policies. Each visit carried the same refrain: sell, consolidate, prepare for the future. One evening, Lisa sat across from me at the dining table, her fingers lightly tapping the polished oak. "Barbara," she said, using my name instead of Mom, as she once had, "this house is far too much for you and Gerald. It's sentimental, but sentiment doesn't pay for hospital bills." I bristled. "This house is our history. Every nail, every board, Gerald built half of it himself." Carl leaned forward, his voice lower, sharper. "History won't matter when you fall down the stairs and break your hip. What matters is efficiency." The word echoed in my ears like a threat. Gerald tried to mediate. "Maybe they're right," he said, rubbing his temples. "We aren't as young as we used to be." I shot him a look that silenced him. My husband had always been practical, but practicality now felt like surrender. That night, after Carl and Lisa left, I could not sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing their voices over and over. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The next day, I called my sister Margaret. She had always been blunt, never afraid to speak what others avoided. When I told her about Carl's pressure, her silence on the other end of the line was louder than words. "Finally," she said, "doesn't it strike you as strange? He's doing well with his construction business, or so he says. Why is he so desperate to control your money?" Her words were a slap. She was right. Carl had never asked us for help, never hinted at financial struggles. Why now? Why so insistent? That evening, I confronted Gerald in the kitchen. He was washing dishes, his shoulders hunched. "Gerald," I said, my voice tight, "do you think it's odd that Carl suddenly cares so much about our finances?" He froze, the dish slipping slightly in his hand. For a long time, he didn't answer. Finally, he set the plate down and turned toward me. His eyes were heavy, haunted. "Barbara," he said quietly, "there are things I never told you." My stomach tightened. About what? About the night Gabriel died. The room seemed to tilt. My knees weakened, and I gripped the counter. "What do you mean?" Gerald's voice trembled, though his words were steady. "I saw them. Gabriel and Carl. They weren't just arguing. They were screaming, fighting near the gorge. Gabriel had papers in his handbank statements. He had discovered that Carl had been stealing from our savings. I felt the air leave my lungs. "Stealing? Our son?" Gerald nodded. "Small amounts at first, then larger ones. Gabriel told me he had proof. He wanted to confront Carl, force him to confess. That night, he demanded Carl return the money. Tears burned my eyes. And then?" Gerald's face contorted. I was too far away to stop it, but I saw it. Carl pushed him. "It wasn't an accident, Barbara. Gabriel didn't fall, Carl shoved him." The world cracked open. For 25 years I had believed in an accident, had forced myself to accept the official story. Now the truth tore through me like glass. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered. "Because Carl begged me," Gerald said, his voice breaking. He was trembling, swearing it had been self-defense. He promised he'd pay back the money, change his ways. Gabriel was gone, and I couldn't bear to lose our other son. I thought. His words collapsed into silence. I staggered back, pressing a hand to my chest. The betrayal was doubled my son's crime, and my husband's silence. For years, we had built our lives on a lie. At that moment, Carl's persistence made terrible sense. He wasn't just being practical, he was finishing what he had started decades earlier. And for the first time, I felt true fear, not just suspicion. Fear that Gerald and I were living on borrowed time, and that Carl and Lisa would not stop until we were gone. The revelation about Gabriel's death left me hollow. For days, I moved through the house like a ghost, replaying Gerald's confession over and over. Every glance at Carl's face in old photographs made my stomach twist. How had I been so blind? I wanted to run to the police, but Gerald stopped me. "Barbara, without evidence, they'll dismiss it as an old woman's grief. Worse, they'll arrest me for covering it up." His voice was ragged with guilt. "We have to be careful. We have to gather proof." We barely had time to breathe before the phone rang. It was Carl. "Mom," he said with a voice so warm it curdled my blood. "Lisa and I were talking. Your 40th anniversary is coming up. We want to celebrate you two with something special. How about a weekend trip to the mountains? A hike, a picnic, photos, it'll be beautiful." I froze. Gerald, standing beside me, heard every word, his face drained of color. "That's thoughtful, son," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "Let us think about it." After I hung up, silence filled the kitchen. Gerald finally whispered, "It's an invitation to our execution." That night we lay awake in bed, whispering like fugitives. "If we refuse," Gerald reasoned, "they'll find another way. Maybe a car accident, maybe a fire. At least on that hike, we'll know what to expect." "So we go?" I asked, shivering. "Yes," he said, "but we'll be prepared. I'll hide my phone, record everything. If we survive, it will be evidence. If not, the truth won't die with us." The following days were a nightmare of pretense. Carl and Lisa visited often, speaking with excitement about the trip. Lisa arrived with bags of supplies, cookies, bottled water, trail mix, showing them off like a child preparing for a school outing. "I also bought a new camera," she said, pulling out a sleek black device. "I want to capture every moment. These photos will be treasures." Her words were syrupy, but in my ears they dripped with malice. Carl came behind her with a large backpack. "I bought ropes, harnesses, lanterns, even a first aid kit. Safety first, right?" The way he said safety made me sick. Gerald's jaw clenched, but he nodded as though impressed. That night, after they left, I saw Gerald slip an envelope into the desk drawer. "It's a letter for Margaret," he explained. "If something happens, she'll know everything. I've written it all: Gabriel's death, Carl's thefts, the will. This so-called anniversary trip. Tears blurred my vision. We're writing our own obituary, I whispered. The night before the hike, we could hardly eat dinner. We sat in silence at the kitchen table, staring at the food we could not swallow. Gerald finally reached across and took my hand. Barbara, he said, his eyes wet. Whatever happens tomorrow, know this. The past 40 years with you have been the best of my life. I broke, sobbing into his chest. I can't lose you, Gerald. You won't, he said firmly, though his voice shook. We'll hold on together. Dawn came too soon. The sky was cruelly bright, the kind of perfect morning that mocked the storm inside me. Carl arrived whistling, cheerful as a boy. Ready for your big adventure, Mom? Dad? Lisa stood beside him, radiant, carrying her camera like a bride carrying a bouquet. This is going to be unforgettable, she said, her smile sharp as glass. We climbed into the car, my pulse thudding like a drum. As the road stretched ahead, I whispered silently to myself, play along, endure, survive. Because deep in my bones I knew the truth. We weren't going on a hike. We were being led to the edge of a cliff, and our own son planned to watch us fall. The trail began gently, winding through trees that swayed in the breeze. Birds darted overhead, their songs mocking the dread in my chest. Lisa walked ahead with her camera, calling out every few minutes, "Look at those wildflowers. Oh, the light here is perfect." To any stranger, she looked like a joyful daughter-in-law capturing memories. To me, she looked like a predator setting a trap. Carl stayed behind us, his boots crunching steadily on the gravel. "How are you doing back there, Mom? Need a hand?" His tone was caring, but his eyes carried the same cold glint I had seen on Gabriel's last birthday, 25 years ago. An hour passed. My legs ached, Gerald's breathing grew heavy, but we pushed forward. Carl encouraged us with feigned cheer, as if exhaustion were part of his design. Then Lisa stopped suddenly, pointing toward a rocky path that veered off the main trail. "Over there! That cliff will have the best view. We need to take photos." My blood turned cold. The side path was steep, the rocks loose. At the top I could already see the sheer drop, a plunge of nearly 100 feet into jagged stone. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said softly. "It looks dangerous." Carl smiled, too smoothly. "Come on, Mom. Just a few steps. Don't spoil the celebration." Gerald squeezed my hand discreetly. His jacket pocket bulged slightly with the hidden phone that had been recording since we left the car. I swallowed hard and followed. The climb was brutal. Twice I slipped, catching myself on Gerald's arm. Carl's hand brushed my back as though steadying me, but I felt the pressure measuring, waiting. When we finally reached the top, the view was breathtaking. Rolling hills, the silver ribbon of a river, a valley stretching for miles. "Stand here," Lisa instructed, positioning us at the very edge. Her camera clicked rapidly. "Hug each other. Smile. This is history." Gerald and I obeyed, forcing smiles. Every muscle in my body screamed to run, but there was nowhere to go. Carl stepped closer, his shadow merging with ours. "Perfect," Lisa said. "Now, one step back so the valley fills the frame." That step meant death. I glanced at Gerald. His jaw tightened, his eyes fierce. Then without warning, Carl lunged, his hand struck our backs. The ground disappeared. The sky spun. The wind howled past my ears as we plunged. I heard Lisa's voice, sharp and gleeful. "Smile. This will be your last photo." Impact came like thunder. Pain exploded through my body, ribs cracking, breath stolen, blood flooding my mouth. For a moment, I thought I was gone. Then Gerald's voice rasped near my ear. "Barbara, don't move. Play dead." I forced my body still, every instinct screaming to cry out. My chest rose shallowly, barely enough to keep breath in me. Above, I heard Carl groaning, Lisa cursing. They had fallen too, though less violently. "Are they dead?" Lisa's voice was sharp with panic. Carl crawled closer. His shadow loomed above my half-closed eyes. He pressed a hand against my chest, waited. I slowed my breath even more. "They're gone," he said finally. "Both of them." It worked. Relief laced his tone, followed by Lisa's bitter laugh. "Good. At least now we don't have to pretend anymore." I wanted to scream, but instead I listened. Their voices, their confessions, every word was captured by Gerald's hidden phone. For the next few minutes, they argued over their injuries, whispering about the story they would tell. We'll say Dad slipped first, grabbed Mom, and we tried to help but fell too. We're the lucky survivors of a family tragedy. My blood boiled, but I stayed limp. Pretending to be a corpse was the only shield we had left. Eventually, their voices faded as they crawled toward the trail, leaving us broken on the rocks. Only then did Gerald whisper, his breath ragged, "Barbara, we're alive, and so is the truth." When I opened my eyes again, the world was a blur of white lights and antiseptic smells. Machines beeped steadily beside me. My body ached in every limb, but I was alive. Gerald lay in the next bed, pale but breathing. For a moment, I thought we had survived, only to be silenced later. Then I saw her nurse, Emily Lee. She leaned close and whispered, "I heard him. Your son. He mentioned Richard," he confessed. "Don't worry, you're safe now." Tears welled in my eyes. I moved my finger weakly against her hand, my only way of answering. She nodded and hurried out. Moments later, 2 uniformed officers and Detective Brian Roberts entered. His expression was calm but urgent. "Mrs. Rodriguez," he said gently, "you don't need to pretend anymore. We know. We're here to protect you." I whispered, my voice ragged. "Carl, Lisa, they tried to kill us." Gerald, still weak, added, "My phone. The recording. It has everything." The detective retrieved it, listening as the damning words played. Lisa's command, Carl's lie, their rehearsed story of an accident. Evidence so clear it burned away any doubt. In the waiting room below, Carl and Lisa played their roles as grieving survivors, accepting condolences. They had no idea the trap had turned on them. When the officers approached, their shock was genuine. "Carl Rodriguez, Lisa Rodriguez," the detective announced, "you are under arrest for the murder of Gabriel Rodriguez and the attempted murder of Barbara and Gerald Rodriguez." Carl's face went white. "That's impossible. We saw them die." His outburst, caught on police recorders, was another nail in his coffin. Lisa turned on him instantly. "You planned it, Carl. You forced me into it." His roar of blame at her echoed down the hall. The alliance they had built over decades shattered in seconds. The trial began 6 months later. I stood in the witness box, looking into the eyes of my youngest son. I searched for the boy I had once rocked to sleep, the child who kissed me goodnight. All I found was a hollow stranger. "My son died 25 years ago," I told the jury, my voice steady. "What remained was a man who killed his brother, stole from his parents, and tried to finish what he started." The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, the courtroom held its breath. Guilty. Carl for first-degree murder and attempted murder. Lisa as an accomplice. Both sentenced to life without parole. I wept not from joy, not from relief, but from the terrible finality of it. Justice had come, but at the price of losing a child forever. 1 year later, Gerald and I sit in our home with 2 children asleep upstairs, our grandchildren, Carl and Lisa's innocence. The court granted us custody. At first, I wondered if I could raise children again at my age. But every night, when I tuck them in, I feel a purpose stronger than fear. I tell them stories about Gabriel, the uncle they never knew. I tell them about kindness, honesty, and the value of truth. I promise them they will never grow up under the shadow of lies. Sometimes I stand at the porch in the evening, looking at the sky the way Gerald and I once did when we dreamed of travel. We may never see the oceans or the faraway places Gabriel wished for us, but we have something else, another chance to love, another chance to build. Gerald stands beside me, his hand warm in mine. We are scarred, yes. We are older, slower, marked by pain, but we are alive. And above all, we are free from secrets. As I watch our grandchildren sleeping, I whisper to myself, family is not defined by blood alone. It is defined by love that survives betrayal, by the truth that outlives every lie.